Colleagues, hello everyone. Thank you for joining our second session on parliamentary development. Today we will look at how our partnerships and programming with parliaments help advance sustainable development outcomes. As a reminder, this webinar is part of a four-part series that looks at how and why UNDP engages with parliaments, how this fits into our broader governance approach, but also helps advance development solutions more broadly. It's also an effort to communicate the significance of this work at a time when there's a growing interest within UNDP in working with parliaments, but also as the development landscape becomes ever more challenging. And these institutions aren't just programmatic counterparts for us, but they're important partners in realizing our mandate. For those of you who couldn't join us last week, the speakers were discussing why we work with parliaments and how strong parliaments are linked with progress on sustainable development outcomes. And we also looked at entry points based on evidence about what makes parliaments perform their roles better than others. Today we'll hear from our truly brilliant colleagues who have led parliamentary programs in very diverse contexts, and we'll talk about the practical reality of this. We hope this will be useful to you, whether you are directly working with the parliament or exploring how to engage with the parliament to enhance your initiatives. So we have with us Biljana Ledenican, a parliamentary development expert and former chief technical advisor in Serbia and Armenia. We have Dragan Popovic, inclusive governance portfolio manager at UNDP Somalia. And we have Alex Reed, chief technical specialist at UNDP Lao and formerly Myanmar. So I'll begin by asking them initial questions, and then I'll open it up for your questions and comments. So let's get started. Biljana, in the previous session, we spoke about how parliamentary engagement can strengthen national ownership of sustainable development and drive important reforms. So could you share some examples of that from your experience that demonstrate this? And what practices have you found particularly effective and worth sharing with our community?
Thank you very much, Agata. It's a pleasure to be here and share some of the experience from the field. We did discuss about democratic resilience in our last call, and it was very interesting. So I started from there. This is in high demand today in times of growing uncertainty. There are different ways in which we want to approach democratic resilience through support of parliaments. And I would say that we should think in terms of trust, capacity, and performance. So the stability of political institutions is at most importance in times of great democratic instability. People's trust in institutions needs to be rebuilt. So people's demand for accountable, inclusive, and effective democratic processes with strong transparency is something that we need to take into consideration. The idea of democratic resilience implies the performance of parliament as vital for functioning of modern representative democracy. We also need to think in terms of capacities of parliament. We are referring here to administrative policy expertise and communication. Why? Because each of them affects policy outputs and outcomes towards a major impact on citizens' day-to-day lives. So there are several ways in which we can approach, or if you like, achieve this. And all the pathways which we will mention now are in a way interconnected for the very nature of parliament and how it operates. So first and foremost, I would like to mention here is legislative impact. This is the most concrete and effective way to achieve impact, secure sustainability, and contribute to democratic resilience. So this is something that you perhaps don't wish to commit yourself to in the project document or in discussions, but this is something you will be striving towards, and you will be creating different ways and approaches how to achieve it. So you will notice that often parliament's MPs, staff don't have the time to follow through what is happening with certain activities. What was the outcome of public hearing? Was a certain law changed? Was it adopted? What did the ministry do? Did they incorporate the changes they got from the parliament? And often it will fall onto us to follow that. So I would say that from the onset, we need to start developing different parameters how we can start monitoring that and to be able to kind of round it up at the end. So how can we really monitor that? Well, if we look at this difficulty of working with Parliament, or these various ad hoc situations that can occur, that can move your, let's say, your attention from parliamentary work, and this happens to staff and parliaments as well. It is very important to work with the staff and ask questions what happened later on. Same thing, like might have to go even outside the parliament, ask certain ministry what was the follow-up. So let me just give you a few illustrations so that you can get the feeling how we did that, for example, with UNDP Serbia. We measured from the beginning the effects of each of our activities. And we tried to, after several years of, for example, organizing 80 mobile committee sessions, we try to show this in a very simple manner for citizens to see what the parliament did for them. So we created a subpage on the website of the parliament where we presented each city which we visited and what was the result of that. So it was a little bit inspired by the UK National Audit Office, but nonetheless, we wanted to see, okay, so they did not travel for the travel's sake, but they traveled and they did this, this, and that. For illustration's sake, on the north of country, we had a mobile session where there was a mobile committee on agriculture and environment. And it was about 11,000 acres of land, which is arid land around touristy lake, which was, the question was whether this should in fact be allowed for agriculture. Maybe the pesticides would flow into the lake and stuff like that. Just to give a very plastic example of that, after this session, where they invite citizens, civil society, two parliamentary committees, and all representatives of the ministry, this was resolved. Same thing happened at the south of the country, where we actually took the agriculture committee after big floods in 2014. We could hardly even come after 5 hours of landslides and very bad roads. After 5 hours of sessions, citizens from small villages were sitting there and waiting to ask their questions. And the government was just about to revoke subventions to agriculture workers. But then when they heard all the problems they had, including these landslides from the floods, the entire committee, both position and opposition, voted against the government proposal. So these would be some of the examples. I also would like to suggest cross-party caucuses as some of the very good ways to approach if you wish to work with parliaments. Why cross-party caucuses compared to committees? Committees in certain contexts can be really good partner to cooperate with, but they are very formal, very rigid in terms of organization and moving them around. There is more room to maneuver. You can work with less MPs. There is no need for quorum. The most important thing is to have both position and opposition. UNDP has been known to organize different types of establish and provide policy advice to different cross-party caucuses, such as GOPA, Global Organization of Parliamentarians Against Corruption, Focus Group on SDGs, Women Parliamentary Network, Green Network, and we also worked regionally. So when we established cross-party caucus in one country, we took these MPs to another country, for example, from Serbia to Moldova, from Serbia to Bosnia and Herzegovina, and then we organized regional conferences and signed memorandums of understandings amongst them. But perhaps the most important mechanism, which I find the best for participatory activity, is green chair mechanism. It is mentioned in the third Global Parliamentary Report, which is written jointly between UNDP and Inter-Parliamentary Union. You can read more about it. But it is based on the Arcus Convention, allowing a seat on a committee, in particular environmental committee, for a civil society organization's rotation. So they sit and go to every committee meeting. They can ask questions, propose certain things. Of course, they cannot vote. We also had SDG committees, which we supported, cross-party work. And we started with information on what is SDGs. We exposed them to the government work. We brought people from the ministry, people from the Inter-Parliamentary Union. They proposed amendments. First time around, 7 amendments were refused. Next year, they came better prepared, and the SDG budgeting was adopted to the law on budget, and so on and so forth. But I will stop here. Thank you.
Thanks, Biljana. These are all great examples, the legislative impact and the agricultural reform and the cross-party caucuses. Dragan, Somalia is also a very special example of a context where our parliamentary engagement cannot really be seen as separate from the broader peace building and state building efforts. Can you tell us how the country office has provided both technical assistance, but also the more political institutional engagement that help the parliament overcome blockages, sustain political commitment, and foster inclusive political processes?
Thanks, Agatha. Thanks to all the colleagues for participating in this session. Yes, indeed, Somalia experience is a bit peculiar, and the role of the parliament right now is really exceptionally important. There are a couple of reasons for that. Somalia has been facing a protracted conflict for quite some time, for decades. Now, Somalia is still lacking major political agreements to happen, particularly linked to federalism and all the discussions that are happening right now in Somalia, which actually for decades are more linked to behind the closed doors, elite, extra constitutional discussions, excluding citizens from the overall decision making. Also, the political mission in Somalia is now being transited, and there is a decision that the mission should leave Somalia in 2 years from now. And now Somalia also is trying to introduce a new transformative agenda that is linked to main governance processes, but also rule of law and economic transformation. Therefore, all the processes that I just mentioned are purely political in their nature. Yes, indeed, they're state building. There are a lot of technical interventions that need to be implemented, particularly with regards to capacitation of the parliament and other relevant institutions. However, state building processes in their essence are political. And therefore, only engagement or integration between a technical and political approach is kind of a way forward that we in Somalia are undertaking right now, because this is one of the lessons from the past, that technical approach cannot overcome political glitches. It can support, but it needs always to have a political shield. Just to give a couple of examples. Indeed, Parliament is a weak institution in Somalia, most of the time working as a rubber stamping institution for the wishes of the government or president's office. However, right now we are in a situation that different parts of the country, so-called federal member states, do not want to communicate with the president's office and the government. However, but they're ready to communicate with the parliament, particularly with the upper house of the parliament, because upper house of the parliament represents interests of federal member states. Therefore, although federal parliament of Somalia represents country as such, but it also represents a federalist model of the country by representing federal member states. Therefore, our technical and political engagement right now to facilitate political processes in the country, reaching political consensus building on particularly contentious issues such as a federalist model, such as electoral framework, such as fiscal federalism and overall allocation of power is channeled through the political processes that are facilitated by the Senate of the Federal Parliament of Somalia. Second area where Parliament showed its relevance and also the openness toward the citizens is a reconciliation process. Although this is generally something that is linked to the executive power, executive could not reach due to political issues with the federal member states. Executive could not lead on the processes but there was an overall agreement and consensus that Parliament can lead the process. Parliament, in the using the face of the leadership of the Parliament, who are also a societal leaders of certain areas in society. Basically, they are clan leaders. So basically, they facilitated the process again. They led the process at the community level, but also integrating political opposition with the government, and also integrating these different technical approaches from the surveys organized at the community level, integrating in the overall political process, which were, as I said, facilitated by the Parliament. Third element that we saw Parliament very active is linked to the constitutional reform, and constitutional reform is something that now should be leading transformative processes, because, as I said, Somalia is still lacking consensus on the overall federalist model, but also on different other societal related issues, such as position of different societal groups, including women in particular. With the UN's support, we managed to strengthen the role of women caucuses in the House of the People and the upper house of the federal parliament, to have strong advocacy on introducing gender quota, women's quota in the reviewed articles of the federal constitution. Of course, we can all agree that 30% quota is not enough, but it is a starting point, or one of the potential starting points. Here in Somalia, reaching 30% quota is something that is linked to mythology and science fiction, because of the societal role of women, or at least acceptance by the society of what the role of a woman should be. However, with a very strong caucus, with very vocal MPs and senators, women senators, it was managed to introduce women's quota in the reviewed constitution, and now those relevant chapters of the constitution have been adopted again by the federal parliament. And my last intervention is that despite all these technical and political efforts by the UN, and being lucky that we are having good offices in Somalia, whereas other country offices do not have, but have resident coordinators dealing with these political issues, I would really strongly address that UN and international partners need to work hand in hand, particularly with regards to advocating for political consensus building and political changes. So not to engage with the international partners as donors, and I deliberately do not use the term donors, but international partners, because only in this way it is possible to jointly advocate and make changes. If all these changes are just linked to the UN's programming, being from the particular agencies or through joint programs, then I'm not really sure that we will be able to achieve impact. So we always like to say, we can bring horses to the water, but we cannot make them drink. Actually, we can make them drink only if UN and international partners work together. If we consider international partners only as donors and they consider themselves only as donors, then I believe that our power and our strength will be significantly reduced. So I will pause here, Agata, and open for any other question.
This is great, Dragan. Thank you so much. It's really fascinating to hear about the Parliament role in facilitating both the processes at community and at political levels, and building the feedback loops between them, and building consensus on the constitutional process. And very encouraging to hear about the quota for women's representation, and very important point on the importance of a coordinated engagement of the multilateral system as one, as you say. Alex, what Dragan's example demonstrates, I think, is UNDP's unique ability to engage in crisis contexts, in fragile contexts. But UNDP is also unique for its ability to program in countries with more restrictive political environments. Based on your work in Myanmar and Laos, what realistic role do you think parliamentary development programming can play in such contexts, and how has it helped create positive change? And could you also reflect on some of the more emerging threats to these efforts that you've seen in your work?
Sure, thanks, Agatha, and really interesting comments from both Biliana and Dragan. Hope we can come back to in the questions. I've got some slides because I thought you might want to see some pictures of these very beautiful countries. So hold on, let me just share. Hopefully you can see these. Yeah, okay. Yeah, thanks. And again, it's really good to meet colleagues online. I've worked with UNDP since 2015. This topic is a really interesting one, and I think it's really critical we work for an organization that supports institutional development across different country contexts and political systems. So I'll try and talk briefly about experiences in Myanmar and Laos, both very different contexts from each other with different entry points and outcomes. I'll quickly go through this. So starting in Myanmar, I was there for 5 years, and I left 3 months before the military coup in 2021. The project itself lasted around 9 years and was jointly delivered with the Interparliamentary Union. And the networks the IPU gave across the world were really valued in a country that was opening up after decades of isolation. And back in the 2010s, supporting the democratic transition in Myanmar was a top priority for UNDP. I remember Helen Clark coming to open the Parliament's Learning Centre, who I worked with at the start, providing capacity building for MPs and staff. The main challenge really we had was trying to meet the very, very high demand. It was an institution building context rather than necessarily development. We had 664 MPs and over 1,500 staff at national level alone, all of who were new to their roles, and 14 region and state parliaments to support as well. So space was open, but politically the challenge was that there were still constitutionally 25% of military MPs with seats in the parliament and former military personnel at senior staff levels. We engaged them in the project when they wanted to engage. Of course, we had to engage the senior staff. Whether it was the right approach to engage military MPs is a matter of debate, I think, with hindsight, considering what happened. Okay. Yeah. Okay, some examples of change. We delivered big event-style capacity building initiatives such as induction for new MPs, but results were mainly achieved through extensive on-the-job support and embedding expertise across different committees and offices. We led one committee after the 2016 election through a full inquiry process, like a pilot project. And this committee looked at the impact of chemicals in food production in the country. It produced a report to the plenary, engaged the media, and this was, a long-term project that was a real breakthrough in how the Parliament conducted oversight, engaged stakeholders, and ultimately improved public health. We ran extensive professional development programs for MPs to get them sensitized to their roles. But through this, we also documented the changes and developed knowledge and training projects that captured improvements in the functions of the parliaments over time. So even in the current situation with military rule and the parliaments not sitting, I hope that these products and the voices of MPs can be used in future and act as a memory of the progress that was made during the short democratic transition. Look, I think another point of importance was to look at the professional skills in the administration in a new parliament. So we delivered work with senior management that helped embed a results-based management culture in the institutions. All the staff were new to their different departments and services. So we worked with all departments through peer-to-peer support with the Australian Parliament to help them to define the services that they delivered in each department. And then we trained up focal points in each department who could help to cascade technical support that was available, so help building the capacity of staff across the whole institution. So I think an important lesson in any context is that a focus on results-based management, change management, and professional skills helps parliaments to lead and sustain reforms. It also helps us as UNDP and the parliamentary work with document the results and communicate what parliamentary support projects are achieving. And I think this is really critical to help draw in more support in future. And so many lessons learned, but politically, I think two of them. So firstly, the space for programming can change with the politics over time. So in 2017, the military in Myanmar committed the atrocities against the Rohingya minority. As a result, UN agencies heavily criticized the military and the government's reaction. We found that this put up barriers within the parliament to deliver certain work. It made access more difficult. We needed a very, very careful communications approach to reiterate the long-term institution building and institutional development role of UNDP. Secondly, and this is one with hindsight, so after the 2021 coup, democratically elected MPs were now in hiding, and they were desperate to communicate their situation with MPs in the region and beyond. So I guess I wish we'd prioritized even more than we did building international solidarity and connections with MPs in other countries who've been through similar transitions and have faced military rule and so on. Okay, moving on to the STEPS project in Laos. So I've been here just over a year. This is a high budget project entirely funded by USAID. So I guess you can understand the situation that we're faced now. It's a one-party political system and we're approaching the 10th mandate of the National Assembly. So as such, it has very well-established ways of working. Provincial assemblies are much newer and an important entry point as a level closest to the people. This politically has been a really complex project since its inception. So there was disagreement, to summarize a long story, between UNDP and the National Assembly about the modality of the project. Previous projects have been national implementation and the National Assembly saw the funds primarily as budget support, whereas, you know, the priorities of the donor and the lack of capacity to handle the volume of funds meant it was direct implementation. But this delayed the start of the project by around 2 years. And the project team was entirely changed in that time. The fact, I think, that one donor was USAID put the project in the middle of certain geopolitical tensions within the National Assembly. And the upshot of this was that all communication was effectively bottlenecked in the Assembly's coordination body. We couldn't talk to anybody directly. So, for example, when I arrived, anytime I spoke to an MP or a staff member or anyone, I needed somebody from the coordination body to accompany me. So in these circumstances, let me change the slide, yep. In these circumstances, we adopted the following approach to help build trust and open space. We went back to the PRODOC and rewrote it to re-establish the national relevance of the project as much as we could. So for instance, how it helps deliver on the National Socioeconomic Development Plan, including priorities to improve governance processes that are in line with SDG 16. And then we continually communicated in writing and in person how UNDP's support was there to make the work of assemblies effective, more responsive, transparent, inclusive. And we felt even in the political system, these were concepts that resonate and were well understood. We also differentiated the approach at national and provincial levels. National Assembly is much more well established. We focused a lot more on providing policy, expertise, research and data to support MPs and committees to make informed decisions about critical national priorities, economic and human development issues. So the picture at the bottom of the screen is the resident coordinator leading a 5-day policy dialogue last November with all MPs, with inputs from across all UN agencies here in the country. Provincial assemblies being much newer, we prioritized digital infrastructure and through this new means to engage the public using digital tools. As part of a trust building process, we signed off funds under a letter of agreement that provided critical support for the assemblies to conduct public engagement activities. And this helped reach 24,000 people last year on different policy issues. And finally, the direct counterpart, we worked very closely with them to build up their own procedures and capacity. This helped build better relations between project staff and opened up space for the project to work in new areas. So there are many lessons to learn, I think, from the difficulties this project had at the start. It's important to be aware of the political implications of donor support. try and diversify wherever possible, even for small amounts. Also, with a high budget project in a complex environment, my suggestion would be to start small with an inception phase to assess entry points and help to build relations. And then the third point is, I think in most contexts, parliaments look for UNDP to provide support for infrastructure, including ICT. And this can really open the door to improvements of information flow to MPs, public engagement, and so on, that can build trust in the institution. So every country is different. I can make many points, but 3 overall takeaways, I think, for working in complex political environments with certain restrictions. Firstly, an effective communication approach is absolutely paramount. This is, I think, echoes a point that Dragan made, but all of our parliamentary projects work in a personal and political space. Well-designed technical solutions alone are rarely enough, so it's critical to build relations, take every opportunity. We always encourage our project staff, meet MPs, meet staff, understand their interests, explain why UNDP is working in the country. And this helps find agents of change and assess and identify new entry points for work. Also, it's important in a communication approach to have simple, short, understandable information about the project in local languages, not just to rely on people reading the product, making links across the national relevance and priorities and so on. And then, yeah, look, I think this is a point made by Biljana too on trust. So in an era where trust in governance institutions is declining, we have to support parliaments to deliver for the public. So in Laos, the information we provided on macroeconomic policy, LDC, graduation, and things like this was highly valued, helped MPs question the government, it made the national news and so on. So like, I think working for projects, this puts us a lot of the time in like this connector and convener role, identifying where expertise exists in UNDP, in the UNCT, and across other parliaments to help take action on key national priorities. And then thirdly, look, in this modern era, we have to support modernization of parliaments. It means both assisting parliaments to digitalize certain functions, but also to help MPs understand and assess the impact of emerging technologies, including on democracy and how they function. And look, I'll just end with a final point, which is reflecting on the time in Myanmar. I was left feeling that the democratic reversals were in part due to a lack of technological literacy by MPs. They were very unprepared for how social media algorithms could be weaponized against minority groups. And this quote from an MP I worked with showed that technology, even procured under the civilian regime, was not well understood and used against democratic protesters after the coup. So experience in Myanmar is that I think emerging technology should be a priority embedded across parliamentary support projects, particularly in this era where AI is accelerating and we see changes across politics, society, and the economy and the job market. So I think parliaments, if they're not capacitated, risk being left behind. So just when we need their lawmaking oversight and representation roles more and more. So I'll leave you, I've probably gone over time, and I just leave you with these final points on modernization and how we might work with parliaments. On this last point, I think it's good to see a new global project. I don't think there's been one for some time. And the component of PAL Deliver that works on digital governance is really important. And I think at country level, it's important to access pool of resources and opportunities to network MPs at international and regional level and make sure that the parliaments we work with are future ready. So thanks for your attention.
Thanks so much, Alex. I really love the points about the transparent communication and the convening role to facilitate engagement on national priorities and helping parliaments modernize and revitalize their mandates. For colleagues who are not familiar with Parl Deliver, that Alex mentioned at the end is the new global initiative that we have in place at UNDP that's making these webinars possible. In fact, we can talk about it later on. But with this, I'd like to open the floor for comments and questions. Please feel free to raise your hand and unmute yourself if you'd like to jump in, or you can post your questions in the chat. Not just questions, we would love to hear your thoughts and comments too, so don't hesitate to share. No immediate questions. I have so many. So if we don't see anything in the next 10 seconds, Erica, please go ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks all for very interesting presentations. I actually have a question for Dragan. You mentioned the how the women sort of managed to get to something that can be seen as sci-fi. How did they do that? Like, how did that happen? And when you said that in that context, it seemed sort of like it could have seemed impossible, but they still managed to do it. It would be very interesting to hear more about the ways in which that happened. Thanks.
Agatha, should I come immediately or?
Please go ahead. No
Okay.
more questions at the moment, so you can take this one.
Right. I will connect this question with what is going on right now in Serbia. So I guess that we are somehow all aware of all these protests in Serbia, and citizens and basically students, and now societal opposition, opposing the comments on government's actions. So something similar really happened in Somalia. Basically, the women MPs and senators, they stopped participating in the sessions. They just did not want to participate. They said, okay, if you want to talk about the women's agenda without us, we are not part of it. So you need to include us in consideration. That is number one. That was really like a genuine initiative from their side, without like having the UN or international partners on the back pushing them to do something. This is exactly what is happening right now with the student movement in Serbia. Basically, that all the political parties and UN sidelined, and having students who request for the change. That really happened in Somalia. Now, after that, UN and international partners picked it up and started supporting this kind of approach through different, you all know that we have different platforms to communicate this and that project, this and that area. But we had the Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General Political, DSRSG, basically coordinating all the UN's efforts on promoting and addressing women-related quota. So basically, by having DSRSG facilitating these discussions, we of course needed to have resident representatives or chiefs of agencies to participate in such a process. When you have RRs participating in such a process, you have at least deputy ambassadors or chief of cooperations participating in such platforms as well, and having some kind of soft conditioning. Nobody mentioned the term conditioning, but let's say, how can I say, what would be the right word? Not compromises, but okay, incentives, let's say. Having incentives, so if you jump on that boat, well, we're going to open different avenues for collaboration with the government. So from that point, nobody could sideline these women activism. And also, in order to support this kind of women activism, we really needed to have a failure from the selection process, where government established something that was called quota ambassadors. 13 ambassadors who were just let, in the air without any support. Now, because we all know that one thing is nice to see on the paper, another thing is to do the action. But what was actually very important is to have empowered MPs in Somalia case in order to initiate these kind of changes. And it is really very important for Somalia context, but I believe in Laos would be absolutely the same, or Serbia or wherever. You need to have a genuine movement. Otherwise, we will be blamed that these kind of changes are coming from the West. Or like we are changing cultural narrative, we are changing everything. So it must be context-led. Otherwise, we can push for as much as we want or provide incentives or condition the process, but it won't happen because all these societies are much more resilient than ours. We need to understand that as well. So this would be my answer.
Thanks, Dragan. Biljana, Alex, would you like to add something from your perspective? I know that the question was to Dragan, but he made a really nice connection to Lao and maybe to your work as well, Biljana.
Alex, go ahead.
Yeah, no, I think it's really important to find the points of leverage. And in Lao, we also work towards a similar increase in women's representation in the assembly system. But of course, it's a one-party communist system, and all of the promotion happens through the party. You have to reach a certain level in the civil service in order to be elected to the national, to even stand as a candidate to the National Assembly. I guess a slightly different approach, which was to conduct wide-ranging research and interviews with MPs and produce a report that went to the Women's Caucus chair that benchmarked gender mainstreaming against international standards and regional countries and things like this. So to provide the evidence and data and voice of women MPs and candidates that, you know, provided directly to the assembly, and then to help them, to give them the information to advocate within the party system and party meetings for an increase in representation. So again, every country is different, and you have to look at the political system and find the leverage and entry points.
I would also like to add just that it's a different context, but we work with them by responding to their demands. There was a women parliamentary network formed of all women MPs in the parliament, and now after some time I can say it's always good to have some men on it, not just to be purely women, because there are many issues that need to be addressed, and when they are together, they're stronger. And as they learned about how they function, more men were interested in joining, because these were questions that they were addressing were really concerning domestic violence and children and so on and so forth. So we did a lot with them. We built trust to some point that even during the parliamentary opposition boycott, those MPs who were boycotting came to our cross-party caucus for women's parliamentary network sessions. So we took it out of the parliament. We organized the UN building like a neutral space. But the most important thing is we managed to achieve legislative impact, whereby these women pushed for amendments to the law on police, law on misdemeanors, and the penal code, introducing harsher penalties for those who commit violence against women and children. So that was the major breakthrough. Then we were invited by different countries like Moldova, and we helped them form their women parliamentary network. And we were even invited by UNDP Algeria to convey how we formed the women parliamentary network and how they work. But I think also one more thing is interesting. They were working not only nationally, regionally, but they were working on the local level as well. And I know Alex also has local components to that. So what they did was they brought the local assembly women members, and we organized conferences for like 400 to 600 women in the parliament building. So that was quite an endeavor, but it was hugely effective that managed for them to push and change so many laws. Thank you.
Thanks so much. I see Dalia's hand is up. Dalia, please go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you all for your great presentations. My question is about digitalization and technology. So Alex, you mentioned that. How do you go about kind of finding the gaps when it's already information they don't know? So how do you like verify what they need to know if they're not even aware themselves?
Yeah, I mean, this is where you do really need expertise in the project. And we use one consultant who's extensive years of experience working on digital transformations of parliaments to conduct a wide-ranging assessment and produce a roadmap that is, you know, agreed upon by the senior administration. One thing that has ended up really important, I've worked on digital transformation in different countries, is to establish a steering committee at, you know, central level to manage the whole process, to take decisions on policy and procedures and ultimately on budget, because you can't support digital transformation with a sustainable budget. So yeah, supporting parliaments to lead the process, but you do definitely need technical expertise in any parliamentary support project on ICT and digital infrastructure. And just 1.2 is that, yeah, it has to go alongside with skills building of MPs and staff to use new technology. And I really think digital transformation is a way into modernizing different functions and procedures, including new means of public engagement. So this helps keep parliaments relevant and to meet people where they are and to help build trust in the institutions and make them look modern. So it's not just an end in itself, digital transformation and ICT. It's actually the means to improve various functions of how parliaments work.
Thanks, Alex. Biljana, Dragan, I'm sure you have some thoughts on this too.
Biljana, would you like to come in?
No, you go ahead, please.
Okay, so this is actually an excellent question, but as an anthropologist, my background is anthropology. Being an anthropologist, I always start with the cultural context where we are. So now, solely speaking from the Somalia point of view and trying to be extremely ignorant about what is happening anywhere else, Somalia is a super oral society. So indeed, Somalia, you will find Somalis at least with 2 phones. And they have 3, 4, but at least 2. Still, when we talk about political processes, when we talk about parliamentary debates, assistance, and things like that, it's always about having eye-to-eye contact, face-to-face engagement. Even during COVID, they were open. The parliament was open to us, to the UN system, to help them basically create this IT system, digital system in the parliament, to use it because of all these restrictions. However, they still found a way to organize in-person sessions, because simply Somalis, it's very difficult. It's not about being old. It's about being how they resolve issues, and they resolve issues by having a person in front of themselves. So this is really what Alex said. It's about the IT system. IT system is there in the parliament, but they do not use it. When they come to really strong and very important decisions, it must be a physical contact. Of course, needs to be transformed, changes, but even when they speak to constituencies, they prefer to go there on the ground instead of picking the phone or organize an online platform. Though there are some moves with regards to constitutional review process. For example, there is an overall platform which many people have access to, and they started discussing, but still in Somalia, this is really still rudimentary, because, as I said, they prefer dialogue.
We know it's not just in Somalia. We get that feedback from a lot of country offices. Biljana, anything you would like to add?
I'll just try to be very brief. I mean, it's a good question, makes us think now at this distance, and for some time has passed from experimenting with portal for monitoring public budget finances to refurbishing websites, introducing e-parliament and so on. So there are 2 aspects which I'm looking at it now. One is internal modernization of the parliament, or how it looks like, but it is about the efficiency of the parliament as an institution within itself. Does not necessarily mean that it will increase their performance. On the other hand, there is modernization towards the citizens. So I think this part is more important now that we look at it. So for this part, you need to have really strong IT unit within the parliament to continue. You need to have source code from the company so that they don't need to be slaves to a particular company and just hire them. So it's many nuances there. But I think what's most important is breaking barriers for meaningful participation by closing this feedback loop, like you rightfully mentioned. And I think this is paramount for building trust, because you are, in a way, this is what parliamentarians really want. At the end of the day, they want to communicate what they do to the citizens, because the citizens are those who are voting. So people need to feel that they are heard. Feedback needs to be timely. So, and I'll go back to what Alex has already said. It is not enough just to create tools and avenues. You need really to communicate. That communication is hugely important, especially today. Thank you.
Thanks so much. Technical expertise, steering committees, closing feedback loops, and facilitating meaningful public engagement, and the importance of face-to-face. These are all very important good practices. I'm not seeing any more questions from the... Oh, Erica, please go ahead.
Yeah, there's a question in the chat.
Oh,
So I can, do you want me to read it out or?
please.
Yeah,
That would be
right.
great. Thank you.
So, Aticha is from the Thailand country office, is asking whether speakers collaborate with other partners on specific issues, such as the Westminster Foundation for Democracy, and how we should position or strengthen UNDP's stance on sort of these kind of partnerships, or like working together with other partners. And there's some background that the Thailand country office works with WFD to support the Thai Women's Parliament Caucus. And while they also engage in this initiative at the Thailand office, their current resources only allow them to focus primarily on technical and strategic support, whereas WFD provides financial backing with a focus of women in politics.
Alex, Biljana, Dragan, would any one of you like to take this one?
I can take it, at least start. We in Somalia do not have engagement with the foundation that was mentioned in the chat box. However, we are having a collaboration in this area, in regards to this area, with other agencies such as Folke Bernadotte Academy and Max Planck Foundation. So indeed, this part, I think that even UNDP globally has an MOU with the FBA with regards to different governance, civic inclusion related processes. And right now, I think that even UNDP and FBA issued a guidance with regards to these areas. However, what is actually very important to mention, when we have this kind of collaboration, we also need to look at it from the funding perspective, because different international partners, and now I'm going to call them donors, they have bilateral interests. So they engage either with the UN or other partners to activate or focus on certain areas, and in this way mark the territory, to use this doggy related wording. So so from that perspective, it is somehow difficult to do the actual coordination, because we do not, in countries such as Somalia, we do not always have a clear picture, clear mapping picture, who is doing what and what the interests are. But indeed, these two organizations are quite willing to work with the UN, and our work is joint in many areas, depending, of course, of our mandates. So, and also these two organizations are recognized by the government, which is also of extreme importance, that government accepts them as partners. Otherwise, there are many other organizations where government is not really happy to work with. So although we are promoting this transparency, we are also bound by the government priorities and political aspirations as well. And they have their own thoughts with regards to engagement with either local civil society organizations or INGOs, because of different reasons, which is, I guess, we need another webinar to talk about it. So over.
Alex, Biljana, we are almost at time, so 1 minute to 2 minutes each, if you would like to come in on this as well.
I'll just say something quickly.
Yes, please go ahead.
Sorry. Yeah, look at development partner coordination. I've seen it done well and less well. Experiences in Myanmar was everybody wanted to support the transition, and it was very hard, you know, to negotiate space between different partners. When it's done well, the Parliament has a strategic plan and a good monitoring and evaluation system. And that means they can assess the effectiveness of support and allocate based on where they know a development partner has expertise in a particular area. You know, when I work with other development partners, I just look at the expertise they have available and how much funding is there. There were other partners working here in Laos who were doing things like training the research services. But if you have a high resourced project, it should be holistic, and, you know, improvements in one area's research services supports professional development of MPs, supports committee development, and so on. So we would often work on the strategic level, helping define the change, and then to see where there were resources in other development partners for certain activities. But again, it really depends on the availability of resources.
Thanks so much, Alex. Biljana, sorry to cut you off.
I would not be able to say better. I wouldn't be able to say better.
It's a great answer. We got one really good question from Aleida in the chat, and I would like maybe for all of you to offer a final reflection, 1 minute each before we close. Aleida would like to learn more about the challenges and opportunities for our parliamentary projects to engage with broader governance and development programming, and what good practices do you have to ensure that there is more integration in our programming? 1 minute each, and then we'll close. Biljana, would you like to start?
Sure, why not? Thank you. There's plenty of opportunities, and we've had that quite some time in the past. And I do believe that broader programming is actually very useful for country offices because it helps them and it can protect them. And when we're talking about designing projects or development of different programs, we need to bear in mind that they need to be designed in such a way that during the implementation, there is a protection for the team implementing it, and thereby for the UNDP in general. So you need to set these parameters from the beginning very clearly. I mean, designing RRF, for example, if you're designing it with donors or not, is hugely important, because this will save you and protect you from unreasonable and inappropriate requests. And this is where global programming can step in. I mean, designing these projects, building in some joint activities. I mean, we've had an excellent cooperation with Bangkok Hub, and Argata was working on the project for sustainable development, and we organized the conference. I mean, this was based on the inspiration by the global program to organize SDGs, sustainable development, climate change and energy transition conference, one after the other in Armenia. So, I mean, that's why I also mentioned at the very beginning, even if you work with cross-party caucuses, they work at local, national, regional, and global level. Women's Parliamentary Network is one of the best examples how that can be built in, but you can also have cross-party caucuses on SDGs. This includes the entire office. It can also, you can work with the climate change team, you can work with the women's programs, because each of them contains something, and the Parliament is like a hub. It's horizontal, and it's also a hub. I would also recommend incorporating agile programming and business continuity analysis, which is something that can also be part, let's say, supported by the global programs. I will stop here. I mean, I have more, but let me stop here.
Thanks, Biljana. Dragan, Alex, 30 seconds each. Could I ask you for that? We are already at time.
If we want, so any political process and transformative process need to be anchored in the parliament. So there is a lot of sense to integrate our approaches, though now since we are fighting for the resources, then there is a tension between government, executive and legislative, who should be prioritized in this process, and there is a hesitance, at least from Somalia point, of the integration. However, indeed, that is the way forward, because, as I said, all state building processes need to be anchored in the parliament, and that's exactly what we are now doing through adaptive management approach in our joint programming.
Alex, any final thoughts?
Yeah, just I mean, of course, integrated governance projects are very important. You support MPs in their lawmaking role, but good quality laws have to come from the executive in many countries. So, you know, it's really important. Also, MPs in their representation role should have a direct link to local governance projects helping to assess improvements in services, what the public needs, follow up with local administrations, and so on. And yeah, look, as I mentioned, often it's a convening role in connecting parliaments to sources of expertise, and this can come from policy areas across the whole UNCT and other development partners and so on. The important thing is to support and package that in a way that assists parliaments to look at the issues and help improve how they perform. So it's just one part of a multi-stakeholder process by which committees, for instance, will gather evidence. They also have to combine that with engaging the public, reporting, following up with the media and things like this.
Thanks so much, Alex, Dragan, Biljana. We are over time, so I think with this we'll wrap up. Thank you so much to our speakers. We couldn't have hoped for better insights, for a better discussion. Thank you so much for agreeing to do this. Thank you to Ezgi, Dalia, and Erica for making this possible. I think what today's discussion showed is that UNDP is not only the largest provider of parliamentary development in terms of geographic scope, but also that our expertise and our access are really tremendous. On a final note, we hope to make these conversations, these knowledge exchanges more systematic and maybe more informal going forward after this series. We plan to create more learning sessions, more knowledge management in this area, and we'll be sending out more details soon. In the meantime, I hope you can join us next week to learn about innovation and parliamentary support, and specifically our support to parliamentary futures committees and building anticipatory capacities within Parliament. So thank you again, and I look forward to seeing you again next week.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Dragan.